Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a history that is, honestly, as fascinating as it is blood-soaked and complex. We're talking about Nagaland, India's 16th state. Now, it's this place of just breathtaking beauty, literally named after its indigenous tribes, but man, its geopolitical history, it is one of the most intricate puzzles you'll ever come across. So, let's dive right in.
Just imagine needing a visa to visit a state in your own country. Crazy, right? But for Nagaland, that's essentially the reality. Thanks to a system called the Inner Line Permit, even Indian citizens actually need explicit government permission just to cross the borders into Nagaland. It's a pretty striking rule, and it perfectly sets the stage for a region that's been defined by historical isolation and, well, fierce independence. So how exactly did we get here? Well, here's how we're going to break it down today. First, the land of the Nagas. Second, the British arrival and cultural shift. Third, World War II and Kohima. Fourth, the post-independence struggle. Fifth, statehood and ongoing insurgency. And finally, part 6, the long road to peace. All right, let's start right at the very beginning. Section 1, the land of the Nagas.
If we look at linguistic and historical evidence, it points to early migrations thousands of years ago, bringing these communities all the way from northern Mongolia and China down to the Irrawaddy and Chindwin rivers in present-day Myanmar. And what's really wild here is that these tribes were not just one homogeneous group. Not at all. They spoke completely different languages and had entirely different social structures. Actually, by the time the mighty Ahom Empire came onto the scene around 1228, these Naga tribes were so fiercely independent and just absolute masters at guerrilla warfare that even the Ahoms couldn't fully control them. They remained utterly unconquered. Which brings us to Section 2, British arrival and cultural shift. So, that centuries-old independence faced its biggest threat yet in the 19th century. After the 1826 Treaty of Yandabo, the British were super eager to secure these highly lucrative tea trade routes through Assam and Manipur. So in 1832, British captains Jenkins and Pemberton marched right into the Naga Hills. I mean, the British thought it'd be a simple, straightforward expansion. Yeah, they were dead wrong. The indigenous tribes, who were known for both incredible bravery and, their headhunting traditions, pushed back violently. The British literally had to launch something like 10 different military campaigns just to try and stop the tribal raids. The resistance was incredibly fierce. In fact, in 1878, British officer Dumont was killed in the village of Konama. It actually wasn't until 1880 that the British finally managed to consolidate their administrative control. But here's the thing. The British didn't just bring soldiers. They fundamentally disrupted an entire ancient way of life. Imagine going from a barter economy to a forced monetary system practically overnight. They banned deeply rooted traditions like animal sacrifices and totally stripped away ancestral forest rights. Naturally, this sparked massive rebellions. We're talking tribal warriors with bows and spears facing off against British Snider-Enfield rifles. And alongside the military, in came Christian missionaries, who dramatically shifted the cultural landscape. In fact, the legacy of that era is still incredibly visible today. Nearly half the population ended up converting. And get this, the Sumi Baptist Church in Sunhabodo, it actually stands today as Asia's largest church. Unbelievable! All this cultural and political disruption sparked a massive awakening. Back in 1918, the Naga Club was formed, and by 1929, they handed a direct memorandum straight to the British Simon Commission. Their demands were crystal clear. No taxation on their uncultivatable land, total exemption from new constitutional laws, and, most powerfully, the demand to just be left alone because, in their own words, they were never conquered. And surprisingly, the British actually listened. By 1935, they granted the Nagas a level of self-governance, keeping them entirely outside the standard constitutional framework. Okay, moving right along to Section 3, World War II in Kohima. But the world was changing fast, and this isolated, mountainous region was about to become the center stage for a massive global conflict. 53,000. That is a huge number. In April 1944, Japanese forces attacked Kohima, which is the present-day capital of Nagaland. Under the command of British Commander William Slim, a brutal 3-month-long battle went down. The Japanese suffered a massive 53,000 casualties. This battle was absolutely pivotal. I mean, it definitively halted Imperial Japan's advance into South Asia. But even though the British won the battle, the war left them completely exhausted and pretty much ready to leave India entirely. That takes us to Section 4, the post
independence struggle.
So the British leave in 1947, which meant India was free. But for Nagaland, the struggle was really just getting started. Things moved incredibly fast. In 1946, a leader named A.Z. Fizo formed the Naga National Council, or the NNC. And their position was zero compromise. They did not want to join the newly formed Indian Union. In fact, on August 14, 1947, literally exactly one day before India's independence, the NNC boldly declared an independent Nagaland. When talks with the Indian government eventually broke down, the NNC established a Naga federal government and even an underground army in 1952. By 1955, things had escalated into a full-blown armed conflict, which forced the Indian government to deploy 4,000 troops to the area.
Which leads us to Section 5, Statehood and Ongoing Insurgency.
Faced with this violent clash, the Indian government decided to adopt a dual approach. First up, diplomacy. In 1957, moderate leaders formed the Naga People's Convention under Dr. Mkonglaba Ao, hoping to find a peaceful resolution. This was a major diplomatic breakthrough, and it was heavily supported by then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. It led to a 16-point agreement in 1961. And finally, on December 1, 1963, Nagaland officially became India's 16th state. It was a massive, massive political milestone. But unfortunately, it didn't put an end to the underground rebellion.
Because the violence just kept going, the government also utilized heavy military intervention. In September 1958, they enacted the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, often called AFSPA, across the Senapati to Maelang and Ukhrul districts to suppress the insurgency. Now, while the government's intent here was to curb extreme violence and maintain order, the imposition of AFSPA actually severely deepened resentment among the indigenous tribes. Ultimately, it fueled further agitation rather than quelling it.
For the next decade, it was just cycles of ceasefires and renewed violence. The government ended up banning the NNC, and in 1975, the Shillong Accord was signed with the goal of bringing peace. But, ironically, it triggered a massive ideological split. Around 140 rebel members, led by Thwingal and Muva, just completely rejected the accord. Inspired by Maoist ideology, they broke away, and in 1980, they formed a new, highly powerful militant group, the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, or the NSCN.
And, well, the complexity only grew from there. Internal disputes actually resulted in a violent split in 1988, fracturing the group into two main rival factions. You had the NSCN-IM, led by Isak Chishiswu and Thuingaleng Wila, and the NSCN-K, led by SS Kopling. This splintering made finding any sort of unified path to peace incredibly difficult. I mean, the Indian government now had to negotiate with multiple, heavily armed competing factions.
So why exactly was a resolution so hard to pin down? Well, the numbers pretty much explain it all. To put this in perspective, the current state of Nagaland is roughly 16,500 square kilometers. However, the core demand of the insurgent groups is the creation of a Greater Nagaland, a sovereign territory encompassing all contiguous Naga-inhabited areas. And this demanded map, it covers a staggering 120,000 square kilometers. It includes parts of neighboring Indian states like Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, and Manipur, plus a massive chunk of Myanmar. You can instantly see why yielding to these territorial demands is an absolute geopolitical nightmare. Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, the long road to peace. Recognizing that military force alone just couldn't solve a problem of this massive scale, the modern era has shifted back toward intense diplomacy, and it shows a huge commitment from both sides. In 1997, a really crucial ceasefire was established with a powerful NSCN-IM faction, and, impressively, that ceasefire has held for over 25 years. Fast forward to August 2015, the historic Naga Peace Accord was signed by government interlocutor R.N. Ravi and the NSCIM. Then, in November 2017, the government actually expanded that peace umbrella by signing agreements with a coalition of 7 other Naga national political groups. Yet, despite all this progress, a final, permanent solution still remains pretty elusive. It all comes down to a deep political deadlock. Basically, the Indian government is seeking complete integration and lasting stability within the framework of the nation. But on the flip side, the NSCN-IM remains totally steadfast in their demand for a separate Naga flag and a separate constitution to honor their unique identity. Because neither side can really afford to concede on these foundational issues, sporadic military clashes do still occasionally occur in the region, even with those overarching ceasefires in place. Look, Nagaland is a place of just breathtaking beauty, populated by people known worldwide for their undeniable courage and an incredibly rich, ancient heritage. Honoring that unique history while simultaneously trying to integrate into a modern geopolitical state, that is a monumental task. It really leaves us asking, how does a nation balance the preservation of a fiercely unique cultural identity with the absolute necessity of unity and lasting peace? It's a delicate, ongoing challenge, for sure. And the final chapter of Nagaland's hidden history is still being written. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredibly complex and fascinating topic today. See you next time.